Hey everyone, quick one. If you were in the hero's shoes, would you choose revenge or forgive? Comment which and why. Now let's dive into the story. I walked into the grand ballroom, the soft murmur of chatter and clinking glasses filling the air, but none of it really reached me. 18 years in law enforcement, and I was still trying to figure out why I was here. Sure, the department wanted me to be at the annual charity gala, showing face, looking polished in my uniform, but I didn't feel like I belonged. I was used to high stress situations, the adrenaline rush of dangerous calls, not this glittering nonsense. Still, here I was. My dad was at the bar, a glass of whiskey in hand, his posture rigid, his eyes scanning the room. He didn't even turn to greet me. He never did, at least not with warmth. Mom was somewhere, probably hiding in the crowd with my younger brother, James. It always felt like they were trying to pretend I wasn't part of the family, especially when Dad was around. It was the same old story, just another night of trying not to choke on the tension that filled the space between us. I stood by the entrance, scanning the room, my uniform heavy and uncomfortable against the smoothness of the evening. That's when I saw him. Chris, a former colleague sitting in his wheelchair by the edge of the dance floor. His eyes were cast down, distant, like he was trying to stay invisible. My chest tightened. I couldn't help but notice how people avoided him, pretending he wasn't there. Officer Daniels? A voice cut through my thoughts, and I turned to see my father. His smile was thin, more a gesture than anything genuine. Yeah, Dad, I said, my voice as neutral as I could make it. He took a slow sip of his drink, eyes flicking to my uniform. Still think you're proving something with all this? He asked, loud enough for a few nearby officers to overhear. His gaze was a sharp edge. Trying to live up to your mother's legacy, huh? Some of us don't need to wear the badge to prove we're tough. I clenched my jaw, feeling the familiar burn of his words, but I didn't let it show. You know it's not about her, right? I shot back, trying to hold my ground. He smirked. Maybe, but you can't tell me you don't enjoy the attention, being the big shot in uniform. You're too focused on the spotlight. He lowered his voice then, but not enough to hide the disdain. You're emotional, Rachel. You're never going to last in this job if you don't get that under control. My stomach tightened, but I didn't respond. The familiar sting of his disapproval sat heavy in the air. I couldn't win with him. I turned away before I said something I'd regret. My eyes landed on Chris again. I crossed the room, trying to ignore the chatter behind me, the whispers that had already started. When I reached him, he looked up, his eyes slightly wide like he hadn't expected anyone to approach. I felt a knot in my throat. Hey, Chris, I said, my voice softer now. Would you, want to dance? Chris chuckled low, the sound thick with both humor and sadness. You sure you want to embarrass yourself with me? He gestured to his wheelchair. Don't care, I said. Come on, let's just get up for a minute. I gently helped him to his feet, and we swayed slowly, awkwardly, to a song I couldn't hear. But in that moment, it didn't matter. People stared, some confused, some impressed, but I couldn't care less. All I felt was the steady rhythm of Chris's steps as we moved together, a moment of defiance against the expectations. For the first time tonight, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The music played softly in the background, but the sound didn't reach me. My mind was still on Chris, still stuck on the tension in the air between me and my father. I helped him back into his chair, careful not to make it awkward. As we stood there, I felt a coldness behind me. I knew who it was before I turned around. Dad was watching from the bar, his arms crossed, his jaw tight. His eyes never left me, but it wasn't a proud look. More like a judgment. The rest of my family, Mom and James, stood at a distance, both avoiding eye contact like they always did when Dad had something to say. I didn't need to go back to them, but something about his stare made me walk over, my boots clicking sharply on the polished floor. Looks like you're the center of attention now, Dad said, his voice low, but sharp enough to cut through the noise. He glanced around the room, making sure people could hear. Is this your big moment? A little dance for the cameras? I fought the urge to roll my eyes, to snap at him, but I held it together. It wasn't about the cameras, Dad. He scoffed, his gaze drifting over my uniform. Everything you do is about attention. You've spent your whole career trying to prove something. I just wish you'd see it. He took another sip from his glass, his expression unreadable. All this, the badge, the uniform. You're not honoring your mother. You're trying to be her. I bristled. I'm not trying to be her. He didn't flinch, didn't look at me like he cared. You're too emotional for this job. That's why you're out there in the spotlight, doing whatever gets you noticed. His eyes narrowed, cutting through me. You're never going to make it if you don't stop chasing her shadow. The sting of his words hit deep, but I didn't let it show. I'm not trying to live up to her, Dad. I'm just doing my job. Doing your job, he repeated, shaking his head like he was disappointed. You'll never get it right if you're only doing it for yourself. I swallowed hard, fighting back the frustration bubbling up inside. The last thing I needed was another conversation about how I wasn't good enough for him. I could feel the eyes of the room on us, but I didn't care anymore. I wasn't here to impress him. I wasn't here for any of them. I glanced across the room again, looking for something to ground me, something to pull me out of the cloud of tension. That's when I saw Chris, sitting alone by the edge of the dance floor, his eyes downcast. It was like he was trying to make himself disappear into the background. Something in me snapped. I wasn't going to sit here, listening to my father tear into me, while Chris, someone who'd been through hell and back, was left alone in his own personal prison. I walked toward him without thinking, ignoring the weight of Dad's glare at my back. Hey, Chris, I said softly when I reached him. His eyes flicked up to mine, surprised. You want to dance? I asked, the words coming out before I could second-guess myself. He hesitated for a beat, then let out a small laugh. You sure you want to dance with me? I'm not exactly in the best shape for it. I smiled, though it felt a little forced. Don't care. Let's just get up for a minute. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded, and I helped him out of his wheelchair, steadying him with one hand while he pushed himself up with the other. We shuffled into the open space, moving slowly, cautiously. There was no choreography to it, just two people trying to make the best of the moment. I didn't look back to see the whispers, the stares. I couldn't. All I could focus on was the way Chris's steps felt under mine, how he held his balance despite everything, and how, in that small act, we defied all the expectations that people placed on us. We weren't out there for anyone else. The whispers grew louder, more obvious now. People weren't sure what to make of it. The dancing officer with a wounded hero, both of us moving as though we had nothing to prove, except to ourselves. And maybe that was enough. By the time the song ended, the tension in my shoulders had eased just a little. Chris looked up at me, a faint grin on his face. You sure know how to make an entrance, he joked, his voice quieter now. Maybe, I said, a small laugh escaping me. But tonight it wasn't about me. We didn't say anything else, just stood there, watching the room return to its usual hustle. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was performing. I didn't feel like I was trying to be someone else. I was just here, and that was enough. As we slowly made our way off the dance floor, I could feel the eyes of the room on us, sharp and unblinking. There was no mistaking it now. People were talking, whispers cutting through the air like blades. Some were confused, others impressed. I didn't care. All that mattered was the way Chris's grip on my arm had tightened a little, like he was trying to steady himself, but more like he was grounding me, too. We didn't need to explain anything. We'd done it for us. We moved off to the side, standing together just outside the crowd, and I could hear the murmurs get louder. My dad's voice cut through the noise, muttering something about how I was making a spectacle of myself, but I didn't turn around. I didn't need to hear him anymore. Then I noticed him. General Marcus Levine was standing by the entrance, watching us. He'd been a staple in the department for years, one of those guys who commanded respect without saying much. Everyone knew his name, and everyone knew his influence. My heart skipped, and I fought the urge to look away. He took a step forward, his gaze still locked on me. The room went quiet for a moment, like everyone was waiting for him to say something. "You're the Officer Daniels," he said, his voice low but clear. It wasn't a question. "You've got guts." I nodded, not sure how to respond, but I didn't need to. He was looking at me like he saw something no one else did. "You did good out there," he continued, his eyes briefly flicking to Chris, still standing beside me. "Not just for yourself, but for him." His voice softened, just a fraction. "You reminded him of what it means to be seen again. That's not something everyone has the courage to do." It wasn't much, just a few words, but it felt like a mountain had shifted. There was nothing flashy about it, but it was real. He saw me. He understood. Before I could say anything, I felt a presence behind me. Dad. His footsteps were slow, deliberate, and when I turned, his face was hard, his jaw set. "General, with all due respect," my dad began, his voice rising just enough to be heard across the room. This kind of stunt doesn't belong at an event like this. We're here to support the community, not to make ourselves the center of attention. I braced myself for the impact of his words, knowing they were coming. But General Levine didn't flinch. He stood tall, his gaze unwavering as he addressed my father. "Respectfully, Officer Daniels," the general said, his voice calm but unwavering. "What I see here is an officer who's not afraid to stand up for those who need it most, even when it's uncomfortable." His eyes locked onto my father's. "What your daughter did tonight wasn't a stunt. It was a choice, and that kind of courage is exactly what this department needs more of." Dad's face reddened, the words caught somewhere in his throat, but he didn't argue. I could see the sting of the general's words cutting deeper than he would ever admit. For once, he had no comeback. The silence in the room thickened, and I realized it wasn't just about me anymore. It was about all the quiet moments I'd fought for, everything I'd done to prove I wasn't just my father's daughter, that I wasn't trying to be a copy of my mother, that I had a place here too. It had never felt like enough before, but in that moment, standing in front of General Levine, it did. I felt a small shift inside of me, a kind of quiet victory that didn't scream for attention. This wasn't a grand gesture, it was something deeper. Someone, finally, saw me for who I was, not what I was supposed to be. "Thank you," I said to the general, my voice low. There wasn't much else to say, but that felt like enough. His gaze softened just a touch, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of expectation. I wasn't trying to make anyone proud anymore. Not my dad, not anyone. I just felt solid, like I belonged. As the general nodded and turned to leave, I felt the tension in my shoulders start to slip away. I didn't need anyone's approval, least of all my father's. Not anymore. And for the first time, I let myself believe it. The drive home was quiet at first, the hum of the engine filling the gaps between the silence. My father sat up front, his eyes on the road, his jaw set like he'd swallowed a lemon. James was in the back, arms crossed, staring out the window like he could pretend this night didn't just happen, but I could feel the tension building with every passing second. "That was a damn circus tonight, Rachel," my father said, his voice low but sharp. "You're not at some high school talent show, you know. You're a police officer. You should have known better than to make a spectacle of yourself." I kept my gaze on the road ahead, trying to calm the tightness in my chest. "I wasn't trying to make a spectacle," I said quietly. "I was just helping someone out." "Helping?" His laugh was bitter, full of disbelief. "You were out there performing, Rachel. You love the spotlight, don't you? Always have." He turned his head just enough to shoot me a glare. "You embarrassed us, in front of everyone important in this city." I clenched my hands into fists, nails digging into my palms. I was tired of this, tired of hearing him tear me down at every turn. But I didn't respond right away. From the back seat, James spoke up, his voice cutting through the air like a knife. "You know, Rachel," he started, his tone dripping with disdain. "Mom would have never pulled something like that. She was tough. She was respectable. You're just trying to outshine her memory? You think you're some kind of hero?" The words hit like a punch to the gut. I couldn't look at him. Not after what he just said. I didn't know how to answer, how to fight back against that twisted version of what I'd been trying to do my whole life. I wasn't trying to outshine anyone, but no matter how many times I explained it, they never got it. I took a breath, my voice steady. "I'm not trying to be anyone else. I'm just doing my job." James snorted from the back. "Yeah? Well, your job's to protect people, not make a fool of yourself in front of the rich and powerful. That's what you were doing tonight, Rachel. You were trying to prove something, and it's getting old." I didn't know how to respond to that without screaming. Every word they said, every accusation, felt like it was chipping away at me. I had spent my whole career pushing myself to meet their impossible standards, trying to earn a little respect, but nothing was ever enough. My phone buzzed in my lap, breaking the tension for a second. I glanced down, hoping for something, anything to distract me from this conversation. But it was a news outlet, posting a snippet about the gala. The headline caught my eye. "The Dancing Officer. Is Rachel Daniels more interested in the spotlight than her badge?" My heart dropped. I scrolled through the article quickly, but the words were the same ones I had heard my father and brother echo, questioning my professionalism, accusing me of using the job to gain attention. I could feel the weight of the phone in my hand, the sting of the headline pressing into my skin like a brand. It was like the whole world was telling me I wasn't cut out for this, that I was nothing more than a sideshow. But the more I stared at the screen, the more I realized I wasn't going to let them win. I wasn't going to shrink away like I had always done, waiting for their approval that would never come. This job, this career, it mattered to me. I had earned my place in it, even if they didn't think so. Rachel, my father's voice broke through my thoughts. You don't get it. You've made a fool of yourself. You embarrassed this family. You've always needed to prove something. Maybe it's time to stop. I tightened my grip on the phone, swallowing hard. No, Dad. I'm done trying to prove anything to you, I said, my voice tight but sure. I'm not going to shrink away anymore. He didn't answer, neither did James. For the rest of the drive, I kept my eyes straight ahead, ignoring the angry murmurs coming from the front and back seats. I didn't need their approval anymore. Maybe they'd never understand, but that was no longer my problem. I was done apologizing for who I was and what I stood for. If they couldn't see it, if they didn't care to, then that was their loss, not mine. The morning after the gala, I woke up to an email from my commanding officer, Lieutenant Harris. The subject line sent a jolt through me. Internal review. Incident at gala. I clicked it open, my stomach dropping as I read through the short, blunt message. They were reviewing my actions at the event, particularly the situation with Chris. I didn't need to read between the lines. This wasn't just a casual inquiry. It was a prelude to something more. The department had already decided there was a problem, and now they were making it official. I stared at the screen for a long moment, the weight of it sinking in. This wasn't the first time my actions had been questioned, but this time felt different. This time, I wasn't just facing my family's judgment. I was facing the department's. The meeting was scheduled for the following morning. By the time I stepped into the conference room at headquarters, I was already bracing for the worst. Lieutenant Harris sat at the head of the table, flanked by two other senior officers, Sergeant Mitchell and Detective Galloway. The air was thick, suffocating, and I could almost taste the disapproval. They didn't even wait for me to sit before the questions started. Officer Daniels, Lieutenant Harris began, flipping through a file in front of him. We need to discuss your behavior at the gala last night, specifically your actions with Officer Williams. I kept my back straight, my hands folded in front of me. I helped him up for a dance. He's a colleague, someone who's been through hell. It was nothing more than that. Detective Galloway raised an eyebrow. It wasn't just a dance, Daniels. You made a spectacle of yourself. You're a respected officer, and your conduct at a public event raised some serious questions about your professionalism. He leaned forward, voice thick with accusation. Your actions were distracting. I kept my tone even, but there was a sharpness in my words. I'm not going to apologize for helping someone who's been through what Chris has. If that's distracting, then maybe we need to rethink what we value in this department. Sergeant Mitchell's lip curled slightly. It's not about helping someone, Rachel. It's about the image. The department has worked hard to maintain a professional reputation, and we can't afford to have officers acting outside of the standard. A sick feeling churned in my stomach. They weren't even hearing me. They didn't care about the context. It was just about optics, about control. And in the back of my mind, I could already hear my father's voice echoing, agreeing with them. You've made a fool of yourself. But before I could respond, Lieutenant Harris spoke again. We've received some feedback from a few influential people in the community, people who were at the gala. His eyes flicked to Sergeant Mitchell and Detective Galloway. And we've also heard concerns from Carson. My stomach dropped at the mention of his name. Carson, of course. Carson was a former officer, now a well-connected politician with ties to my family. He'd always been a thorn in my side, but I hadn't realized how far his influence could reach. Carson, Lieutenant Harris continued, has voiced concerns about your judgment, Officer Daniels. He's implied that your actions were more about personal gain than about supporting the department's values. He let the words hang in the air, each one a nail in the coffin. I couldn't hold back a bitter laugh. Personal gain? I said, shaking my head. I didn't dance with Chris for a headline. I did it because he's a human being. He deserves that respect. I felt the weight of Carson's influence creeping in. His voice, his ties, his power. They didn't care about Chris. They cared about their image, and Carson had made damn sure they saw this as a problem. Sergeant Mitchell's eyes narrowed. And what's your defense here, Daniels? That you were just doing the right thing? You don't think you've opened yourself up to scrutiny with your display? We can't afford to have officers who draw attention for the wrong reasons. I don't care about the attention, I said, holding their gaze. I care about doing my job. If that's a problem, then maybe it's time for a bigger conversation about what we actually stand for. Lieutenant Harris tapped his pen against the table, his eyes calculating. This isn't just about the gala, Rachel. It's about your judgment, your decision-making. You've been a part of this department long enough to know the stakes. I didn't say anything for a moment, letting the weight of their words sink in. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. This wasn't about the dance. This wasn't about Chris. This was about me being a woman in a male-dominated field. And it was about the people like Carson who thought they could control my career with whispers and rumors. I wasn't going to let them win. I stand by what I did, I said, my voice steady. If that makes me a distraction, then I guess we have different definitions of leadership. Lieutenant Harris exchanged a glance with the others, but no one spoke for a long moment. The tension in the room was thick, but I refused to back down. Carson could spread his lies, and my father could keep telling me I wasn't good enough. But I wasn't going to let anyone dictate my worth. Not anymore. Finally, Lieutenant Harris cleared his throat. We'll take this into consideration, Officer Daniels. For now, just stay off the radar. Stay off the radar. I could practically hear the doors closing behind me. I stood up without another word, my back straight, my hands trembling just a little. The room was heavy with their disapproval, but I could already feel the resolve settling into my bones. They could try to tear me down, but I wasn't going anywhere. I didn't leave that meeting with my tail between my legs. I left it with a fire burning in my chest, a quiet, simmering rage that had been building for years, but never had a reason to surface until now. They wanted to doubt me? Fine. But I wasn't going to let anyone take me down without a fight. The next day, I started digging. I sat at my desk, the glow of my computer screen illuminating the tension in my shoulders. First, I went through everything I could find on Carson. Emails, reports, any public statements he'd made. It didn't take long to uncover the pattern. His involvement in politics against women in law enforcement, specifically targeting those in high-profile cases, especially officers like me. He'd used his connections, his influence to undermine women who didn't fit into his narrow vision of what a cop should be. He wasn't just a politician. He was a puppet master pulling strings from behind the curtain. I pulled up report after report, highlighting every instance where Carson's name appeared in the context of undermining female officers. It was all there, subtle attacks, insinuations about their professionalism, and plenty of rumors about emotionally unstable women in law enforcement. His fingerprints were all over it. He had built his career on pushing out women who dared to take up space, but I wasn't going to just sit on this. I needed statements. I needed witnesses who had seen the scene at the gala and could vouch for what had really happened, not the bullshit the department was spinning. I called Chris. Hey, I said when he picked up. It's Rachel. Listen, I'm working on something, and I need your help. He was quiet for a beat, probably trying to figure out what I wanted. What's up? I need a statement, I said, my words coming faster now, the idea starting to take shape. I need you to say something about the gala, the dance. You were there. You saw what happened. It wasn't some stunt. It wasn't a publicity grab. Chris exhaled slowly. You sure you want to drag me into this? His voice sounded tired, like the weight of it all was pressing on him too. I'm not really trying to stir up anything. I'm just trying to get through the day. I get it, I said, my voice softening. But I need your help. I'm trying to clear my name here. I need you to tell the truth. There was a long pause. Then Chris sighed. All right, I'll do it. But don't make me the poster child for this whole thing. I couldn't help but let out a breath of relief. Thanks, Chris. I owe you one. Next, I reached out to a few colleagues who had witnessed the scene, guys who were there and could back me up. They didn't hesitate. They weren't afraid of Carson or the department's pressure. I knew they had my back, and that meant everything. By the end of the day, I had everything I needed. Testimony from Chris, statements from my colleagues, and a stack of documents linking Carson to the smear campaign against female officers. I wasn't just going to let him manipulate me any longer. I was done being silent, done letting him pull the strings. I was going to expose him, and I was going to do it the right way. The next morning, I walked into Lieutenant Harris's office with the complaint in hand. The room smelled like stale coffee and old paperwork, but it felt like the weight of the world was in there with me. I dropped the folder onto his desk. I'm filing an official complaint. I've got evidence that Carson has been working behind the scenes to discredit female officers, and I'm not the only one he's targeting. Harris glanced at the folder but didn't touch it. He didn't even look up at me. "You're sure about this, Daniels?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I said, my voice steady, unwavering. "This is bigger than me, and I'm not going to let him or anyone else ruin my career with lies." He picked up the folder, his eyes scanning the contents. I watched his face as the color drained from it, his expression hardening with every word he read. "This could get ugly," he muttered, almost to himself. "Let it," I said, my heart pounding in my chest. "I'm not running from this anymore." For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for someone else to make things right. I wasn't waiting for validation from my family or the department. I had the truth on my side, and I was going to make sure it was heard, no matter the cost. Harris didn't respond, but the way he stared at the folder told me everything I needed to know. The pieces were in place. Now it was just a matter of watching the dominoes fall. The meeting was held behind closed doors, just as I expected. The department's upper brass was seated around a large table, the air thick with anticipation. My heart was pounding, but I'd never felt more certain about anything. I'd put everything out there, my career, my reputation, the risk of losing it all. But now I was standing on solid ground. The truth was on my side. I sat at the table trying to keep my posture straight, trying not to feel the weight of every pair of eyes on me. Lieutenant Harris sat across from me, his expression unreadable. The rest of the room was filled with higher-ups, including General Levine, who gave me a sharp nod as I entered. The door shut behind me with a soft click, and the room went silent. Harris cleared his throat before speaking, his voice calm but authoritative. "We've completed the investigation into Officer Daniels' actions at the gala, as well as the broader concerns raised about her conduct and the recent allegations." The words hung in the air, but there was no turning back now. "The investigation revealed a pattern of interference from former Officer Carson," Harris continued, his eyes scanning the room as he spoke. "We found evidence that he had been using his connections to undermine female officers in the department, especially those with high-profile cases like Officer Daniels." He paused for a moment, letting that sink in. The claims against Officer Daniels were part of a larger campaign to discredit her and others like her. I sat up straighter, meeting the eyes of everyone in the room, including the ones who had been questioning me. I could feel my pulse in my neck, but I didn't flinch. General Levine leaned forward, his gravelly voice carrying across the room. "Rachel Daniels' actions at the gala, while unconventional, were not a publicity stunt. They were a display of compassion. She helped a colleague, someone who has been written off by this department and by the world." He turned to face me, his expression firm. "And she did it with dignity?" I wanted to say something, thank him maybe, for finally seeing it, but I didn't. Instead, I just nodded, my throat tight. Chris was standing near the door now, looking uncomfortable in his own skin but determined. When the general nodded toward him, he stepped forward without hesitation. "Rachel's the reason I'm still standing here today," Chris said, his voice steady, though I could hear the rough edges of emotion beneath the surface. "When I was injured, when the department and a lot of people wrote me off, she was the one who pulled me back. She didn't treat me like I was broken. She gave me my dignity back." His eyes flicked to the officers in the room. "It wasn't for the cameras, it wasn't for any damn applause, it was for me." I could feel the weight of everyone's attention on us as he spoke, but I kept my focus on him. Chris was a fighter in every sense of the word, and hearing him speak out like that made something inside of me shift, like I wasn't alone in this anymore. Harris nodded, looking around the room. "We've also received statements from several officers who were present at the gala and witnessed the situation firsthand. They corroborate Daniel's version of events." One of the officers from across the table spoke up. "We've been through worse as a department. If anything, what happened at the gala showed that we have people who care about each other, who are willing to go the extra mile." Another officer joined in. "We could use more of that, not less." The murmurs of agreement rippled through the room, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief that I hadn't anticipated. For so long, I'd been fighting for validation, fighting for my place, but now I was seeing it come together. Maybe they were finally seeing the real me. But then I caught my father's eyes across the table, and for a moment, everything stopped. His face was unreadable, a mask of stone, but I could see the tightness in his jaw. The same tightness I'd seen for years. The same tightness that told me he was thinking, calculating, measuring the situation. The general's voice broke through my thoughts. After reviewing all the evidence, it's clear that Officer Daniels acted in line with the values this department stands for. We're reinstating her to her previous position with full respect from her colleagues. The words hit like a weight had been lifted from my chest, but the victory felt quiet, subdued almost. I didn't feel a rush of elation. Instead, I felt the kind of quiet vindication I hadn't allowed myself to hope for. They had seen me, and for the first time in a long time, they hadn't tried to bury me under their expectations. Lieutenant Harris cleared his throat. That being said, Carson's actions will be investigated further. We cannot allow this kind of behavior to continue. The room shifted, voices rising in agreement, but I barely heard them. All I could focus on was my father, still silent, still watching me. For a moment, I thought he might say something, anything, but the words never came. His silence felt like a wall between us, one that I couldn't quite break through, no matter how much I wanted to. I stood up slowly, trying not to let the weight of the room crush me. "Thank you," I said, keeping my voice steady. "But this isn't just about me. It's about everyone in this department who's been overlooked or undervalued. We all deserve to be seen." The general gave a slight nod, as if recognizing something in me I hadn't even realized was there. I turned to leave, my heart still pounding in my chest, but I knew this was just the beginning. Things weren't going to magically get easier, but for the first time in my career, I wasn't fighting alone. And that made all the difference. The fallout from Carson's actions hit harder than I expected. Within a week of the meeting at the department, the investigation into his interference began. It didn't take long for the whispers to spread, first through the department, then beyond, catching the attention of local news outlets and political circles. Carson, the well-connected former officer turned politician, was under fire. His carefully crafted image of a respected figure crumbled as more and more officers came forward with their own stories of manipulation and backdoor dealings. I didn't feel any satisfaction watching him fall. There was no joy in it, no sense of justice served. Watching Carson's career unravel was like watching someone drown. You know they deserve it, but it doesn't stop the nausea that rises in your throat as the waves crash over them. The department moved quickly. Carson was suspended, pending a full investigation into his involvement in discrediting female officers. Rumors swirled that there were plans to have him removed from the force altogether. His power was slipping away with each passing day. The media caught wind of it all. Cameras hovered around the department's entrance, microphones shoved in faces, reporters camping outside to get the next scoop. And of course, they wanted a statement from me. I could hear the press's voice in my head already. The dancing officer who took down the politician. But I didn't give them the satisfaction. I didn't care about the headline, about being some hero in a scandal. I was done with the public spectacle. I wasn't going to speak for their cameras or for anyone's entertainment. I had nothing left to prove. A reporter caught me at the department one morning, his camera crew right behind him. "Officer Daniels, can you comment on the fallout from Carson's suspension?" I turned to face him, holding my ground, but my answer was simple. "I'm focused on my work. That's all I have to say." He tried to push, but I was done giving interviews, done trying to spin a narrative for anyone but myself. I turned and walked away, feeling the pressure of their eyes on my back, but I wasn't going to shrink anymore. As I walked through the hallways, I could hear the hushed conversations between my colleagues. Some congratulated me quietly, others avoided me like they were waiting for me to slip up. I didn't care what they thought anymore. The department had been shaken, but I wasn't about to fall apart with it. The real pressure came at home. My father had been noticeably absent from the department, as if trying to distance himself from the fallout. I knew what he was doing, trying to keep his name from being associated with Carson's disgrace. But when I walked into the house that evening, the tension between us was palpable. "Rachel," he said, sitting stiffly at the dining table, his glass of whiskey in front of him untouched. "You've put us in a very difficult position." I didn't sit down. I wasn't in the mood for his lectures. "I'm not the one who caused this mess, Dad." His gaze hardened. "But you're the one who made it public. You dragged the family into it. You think your mother would have done this?" I clenched my fists, feeling my jaw tighten. "You're always going to bring her up, aren't you?" I hadn't meant to say it, but the words spilled out. "You think everything I do is to prove something to you and her. But this isn't about either of you. This is about me." For a moment, the room was silent. He didn't respond, just stared at me like he was trying to figure out how to take me in. I was done with waiting for his approval, done with pretending his disapproval didn't tear at me, but it didn't hurt as much anymore. I'm not going to apologize for what I did, I said, my voice steady now. I did what was right, whether you like it or not. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. We both knew where we stood. The next few days were a blur of paperwork, case files, and whispers from colleagues. Carson's influence had weakened significantly, but the damage had already been done. It wasn't just his career that was tarnished. It was his network, his connections. The political power he'd relied on was slipping through his fingers, and he couldn't do anything to stop it. I didn't take any pleasure in watching it happen, though. Watching him lose everything was like watching a storm destroy everything in its path. It was destructive, but it didn't make me feel stronger. The department officially cleared me of any wrongdoing, and I was reinstated to my full position. The whispers quieted down, but they didn't stop. I was a woman in a man's world, and that would always be the case. But I was okay with that now. I didn't need to be a hero, and I didn't need anyone's approval. My phone buzzed as I sat at my desk, and I glanced at the message. It was from Chris. "How's it going?" He texted. "You holding up?" I smiled to myself, my thumb hovering over the reply. He'd been through enough, but he still had my back. That was something I could count on. "Yeah," I typed back. "I'm holding up. And I think I finally know what I'm fighting for." I hit send, feeling a small weight lift off my chest. I wasn't interested in revenge or making Carson pay. I was just interested in moving forward, one step at a time, in my own way, on my own terms. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. The ceremony was held in the same grand hall as the gala, but this time it felt different, emptier, quieter. The room was full of familiar faces, but there was no celebratory energy. The kind of applause that once would have had me on edge, waiting for the next round of praise, felt distant now, almost hollow. They called my name, and I stood up, the weight of my uniform heavier than I remembered. As I walked toward the stage, I didn't feel the usual rush of adrenaline, the desire to prove something, to show I was worthy. Instead, I felt something unexpected. Peace. It was as if I was finally at the place I was meant to be, standing there not because I needed anyone's validation, but because it was simply where I belonged. The applause was quiet, respectful but subdued. No one stood, no one cheered. It wasn't the kind of reception I was used to. It wasn't a grand spectacle. And for once, I didn't care. I was fine with the quiet. When I reached the stage, Chris was waiting for me. He was standing with a cane, the same quiet strength in his posture that had always been there. But now there was something new. Pride. His eyes met mine, and he gave a small nod, like he understood exactly what I was feeling. It wasn't about the applause. It was about what we'd fought through to get here. I stepped up to the podium, nodding at the general, who was handing me a plaque for distinguished service. I took it with a simple thank you, but no words came. The weight of the moment didn't need anything more than that. As I turned to leave the stage, I caught sight of the empty chairs where my family should have been sitting. My father, my brother, they weren't there. Part of me thought I should feel the sting of their absence, but the truth was, I didn't. Not anymore. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their presence. I was finally standing on my own, in my own light, and that felt more right than anything I'd ever done. As I stepped off the stage, I was approached by a younger officer, her uniform a bit too loose, like she hadn't quite grown into it yet. She stood in front of me, shifting nervously, her hands clenched at her sides. "Officer Daniels," she said quietly, her voice almost lost in the noise of the room. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" I looked at her, noting the uncertainty in her eyes. She was probably one of those officers who'd been overlooked, like I had been when I first started. I didn't offer any advice, didn't try to fix it. I didn't need to. Instead, I nodded and listened as she spoke about the struggles she faced in the department, how she felt invisible, how her opinions weren't heard, how she was often made to feel like she didn't belong. I didn't interrupt. I didn't tell her what she should do or how to handle it. I just listened. I let her talk, and when she was finished, I gave her a small smile and said, "You belong here. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." She gave me a quiet nod, her shoulders a little less tense, and walked away. I stayed there for a moment, letting the room continue around me. I wasn't interested in staying in the spotlight, in posing for pictures or answering questions. I had nothing left to prove to anyone. I walked out of the hall with my head high, the weight of the plaque in my hand feeling like nothing more than a reminder of the journey I'd taken, the journey I was still on. The world wasn't going to stop turning, and neither was I. But for the first time, I was at peace with where I stood. confident, steady, and most importantly, free from the need to fight anyone else's battles but my own.